Figures another week and we'll be good.
Nice. Good news.
Yeah. Really good news.
Excellent.
Camp.
Yes. What's a book on the Firebird? Is that what you have? A book called The Firebird? Looks like it. Over your right shoulder.
It's fake. It's a picture. I don't know.
Oh, we're live. Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. And I just lost my screen. Where is it? There it is. Welcome to Hopeifiers. Okay, we are broadcasting from the ancestral home of the Blackfoot Nation. My friend and colleague Scott Sweetman is here with me today. Scott, what are we talking about today? What is the Hopeifiers theme for today?
We are talking about guilt.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
Great topic, guilt, exactly. So the point of the show is we're going to heap guilt on all the viewers so they feel terrible. Is that kind of our strategy? Is that our plan?
Exactly right. We're dealing out huge doses of guilt for anyone who'll listen. No, guilt's really interesting because there's been a lot of research, a lot of debate on the positive aspects of guilt and how to define what's healthy guilt and what's unhealthy or destructive guilt. So I think that's kind of where we're going to go today. I know that you and I have had some ancillary conversations where we've talked about what role guilt plays in lots of parts of human interaction and development and growth. So I think that's what we're talking about today.
Well, excellent. Well, it sounds like you've actually done some research, so we should hear from you first. Let's go, Matt.
Well, the first thing I started with is what was the difference between guilt and shame, right?
Yes. Hey, yeah.
And so most people agree that guilt is when there's some sort of transgression or action that you feel was inappropriate or wrong or hurt somebody. And it's more of an internal feeling that the action was wrong or inappropriate. But shame is far more insidious. And, I couldn't find anything that said that shame was really a positive thing to the individual. There's been some work on shame in terms of rehabilitation for offenders and things. But shame is when you feel that you're wrong, or that, the organism that is Alan or Scott is somehow tainted or bad or wrong. And those are really destructive feelings, and don't seem to have much of the personal growth opportunities that healthy guilt can have. Right.
So you're saying that shame is I am bad, and guilt is I did a bad thing.
Yeah, pretty much. That's a good way to lay it out there. So I don't think we'll talk about shame today. I think it would be a good discussion to have. But I think that today we really want to focus, because we always want to give people hope, and we certainly hope that people who tune in get something positive out of this. And so I really was excited about the research that's been done into healthy guilt and how to identify healthy guilt and unhealthy or destructive guilt. So I think that that's really what we need to focus on. And how would you define those things, Al? If you were just throwing out a guess there, or how do you define them in your own life?
Yeah, so I guess I've thought about it a lot, because I see guilt as being a real kind of a brake, a damper on having the best life possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying guilt doesn't have a purpose, but holding on to guilt and kind of reliving where I did a bad thing, then kind of leads ultimately to shame. If I keep repeating that, I did this bad thing, I did this bad thing, I did this bad thing, the next conclusion is going to be I'm a bad person, right? So I think guilt is great in small doses. You know what? This was wrong. I screwed up. I need to apologize to my friend Scott because I screwed up. Guilt serves a great purpose then, right? It helps me change my behavior to something then that builds and strengthens relationships, right? But guilt about everything means that you kind of, your life is less sweet than it could be. Joys are less significant, those kind of things because of the influence of guilt is kind of how I think it works. But what did you find out, or what insights do you have?
Yeah, you hit on some of the really important points. So I looked at, there's some institutes and centers and teams that are really dedicated to this topic. And there's been a lot of great research that's been done, in the last couple of decades in it. So there was a lot of fertile information. And I really suggest to anyone who's struggling with guilt, both, if they feel a lot of negative guilt, and we'll talk about how to recognize that, or if they want to learn how to turn guilt into a more positive experience and grow from it, to look into some of the research. And I didn't spend any money, and I found hours of good, documented, well-referenced information on the topic. So it's something that people shouldn't be suffering with. And if you can't or don't want to do it that way, there's lots of good professionals that can help you, turn that around and make it positive. So the things that you hit on healthy guilt, and the problem with guilt is it causes stress, and you and I both know the health issues that stress can cause. Professionally in your business, that it reduces workflow, it reduces productivity. When people are looking at maximizing not just their employees' health, but also the productivity of their business, then guilt is something that can really undermine those activities. So healthy guilt, as you said, is when something happens or we do something, and it may have been intentional, it may have been unintentional, but after it's happened, we recognize that it's hurt somebody, right? And so it's easy to improve relationships or turn that into a health situation by apologizing, by making amends, and changing your behavior. And this is where we get into using healthy guilt as a behavior modifier. I've got some really interesting about a study that was done in 2007. I'll share with you in a bit. So changing your behavior, accepting what's happened, accepting your fault, and ultimately moving on. And you really hit on that, and how that unhealthy guilt is really puts on the brakes and things don't move on, and you find yourself in that cul-de-sac of, guilt and how do I get past this, and you start avoiding people and those kind of things. And that's how we define unhealthy guilt.
Yeah, so, actually, just thinking of that, Scott, you think about this. If you have an unhealthy guilt situation, then you have regret. You always have regret then, right? You can never release regret if you always, oh man, I screwed that up. I screwed that up. If you keep repeating that script to yourself, then you live in a state of regret, right?
Well, unhealthy guilt can really take over the dialogue. And this is when we look at some of the studies that psychologists and psychiatrists have done, behavioral specialists, where unhealthy guilt really starts to dominate your internal conversation and takes over that internal voice. And as you said, it just sort of creates this bio loop where you can't move past it. You can't make amends with a person. You can't, you stop dealing with them. You retreat inside yourself. So you're missing more opportunities, and then you feel guilty, especially if it's a family member or a loved one, you disengage from them, and it just feeds onto itself really quite quickly.
Right, exactly. And Scott, let me ask you this question. Have you ever made a mistake in your life?
Well, you said in the last 5 minutes, right? Yeah.
yeah. So my point is we are all imperfectly perfect human beings, right? We all fall short. We all make mistakes. We all are insensitive sometimes, or inconsiderate sometimes, or selfish. That's human. That's being humans, right? So we all screw up from time to time. And then if we then live with that we can't release from that, we always have this regret about these bad things that we have done, or these inconsiderate things we've done. That's a tough place to live.
Well, and it's not interesting. It's not just unique to people. If you want to see this effect, as I'm like your lovely wife, Corolla, love animals and train horses, and I've been into training dogs for a while, and we have a new Akita pup, and Akitas are great protection animals, and ours is just entering into puberty, our Hoshi, and today one of the family members went to take a dog treat away from him, and he growled at them, and of course that's a big no-no. And so, of course, I'm the alpha of our pack. So I stood up and I used my alpha voice. And he retreated really quickly, and he felt a lot of guilt. And so for the rest of the day, you know, of course I didn't hit him or discipline him, but he felt guilt, and animals feel guilt too. And so for the rest of the day, he's behind me now here somewhere, but he's, you know, he's really sort of quiet. He's, you know, he comes by me and he looks up at me and he gives me a little lick, and people are just like that too. You know, when we do something wrong, we just want to make it better. And the best thing that we can do, that all the research shows, is just take action to make it better, do what you can, and then let it go. You know,
Yeah.
because you know, because it spreads right now, you know, like with my dog, or even more so with, you know, my two-legged loved ones. If that guilt starts to spread, and guilt does spread, right? So, you know, then somebody does something to you, and then it wasn't maybe that big of a deal, or, you know, in an hour or two or a few minutes later, whatever, you think, well, you know, it wasn't that big of a deal, and obviously they were doing their best, but they start to avoid you, or you feel that, you know, that chill in your relationship, and then you start to feel guilty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, what can I do? You know, I didn't do anything wrong. What can I do to try and make it better? And so I think that guilt is something we should all really be aware of, and it definitely starts when we're young, and that cycle. And we really need to teach young people that how to make guilt healthy, and to how to use it to change our behavior.
Right. Yeah.
Have you
Makes
had,
sense.
I bet right now, can you think of something that you did that was not really a big deal when you were a kid, but you still kind of feel guilty about it?
Yes, I do. Yes, actually, it wasn't, and actually, I don't know if it was a big deal or not. It was where I should have asked a question or stood up and did something, and I didn't. I just kind of, you know, I turned turned away and didn't want to ask, right? Didn't want to know, right? And that was, it could have been where there was a situation where somebody actually was not safe, but I didn't ask the question to know that. Like, so in my, I kind of addressed that, yeah, okay, maybe, you know, I got to forgive myself for it. I can't change it now, but it certainly is the case that it's something that if I could go back in time and correct something, I would do that differently. I would, yeah, that's.
But we all have those, right? And we do remember them, because guilt is so powerful. And that's when I was doing my research, how I was talking about with children. It's really important that, you know, an adult or a mentor steps in at that point and says, you know, first of all, to recognize the signs of guilt or shame in somebody, and not to make them worse, to step in and say, you know, do you feel that, you know, that you've done something, or that you could have done something? And you brought up a really good point with your example. It's not always something we do. It can be something that we don't do, right?
Right.
And that's just as powerful. So, and I know there's been a lot of examples of where that happens. Survivor guilt is an example of an unhealthy guilt, where we do nothing, and we're guilty that we've survived and somebody else maybe hasn't, or, you know, something bad happened to somebody else and we were lucky and it didn't happen. So I think that adults really need to understand guilt and look for it in their kiddos, and help teach them that, you know, guilt is an indicator of an action that we could take or should take to make ourselves feel better, because there's no reason that we still carry around that guilt as adults, and we all have it. You know, we don't ever have to think that hard to think of something we did that, you know, if our own kids did it, we wouldn't punish them or hate them for it. We'd put our arm around them and say, you know, it's really, you know, you did the best you could with what you had.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
one of the keys. During the research, that phrase, you know, I did the best with the information I had.
Yeah.
It is a key phrase that we all need to learn.
Yes.
And when we're feeling really guilty about things, or that unhealthy guilt that sticks with us, we really have to repeat that to ourselves and say, you know, and it's not to let ourselves off the hook. And, you know, we all sort of have this, oh, guilt, I have to feel guilty or I'm a bad person. But almost always most people do try and do their best, given everything they know.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. They do the best they can in that moment in time with what they know and what they have available to them. Right. That's
And
the
the
reality.
experience that they've had to that point. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And often, especially with kiddos, they don't have a lot of experiences to put it against and say, well, you know what, that's a fairly common thing. And, I feel bad about it and that's good, but I'm not a bad person. And very quickly, guilt turns to shame, which is much harder psychologically to turn into a positive thing. So I think that one of the things that we can take as a Hopeifier point out of this is that as adults, we can really help young people and other adults, of course, accept that often what we did or what we think we didn't do that we feel guilty about was in fact the best that anyone could have done in the same situation with the same amount of facts, with the same experience, et cetera, and then move past it. Everything I read said that the key to dealing with guilt and turning it into something positive is to, put a pin in it and say, it's done. I've done everything I could. I've made amends. I've apologized. Maybe the other person didn't accept. Maybe the other person has passed away and I can't make amends. I can't fix this. Often when somebody passes away, a family member, we feel guilty, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't apologize to them. I can't, take back what I said to them the last time I saw them. Those kind of things.
Right.
And, we need to put a point to that. I did want to share with you a really cool study in 2007. And it goes back to their subjects were, surprisingly enough, all Caucasians, all white people, middle-class white people. And they told these people, they, of course, had a control group, and then they had the group they were actually studying. And so what they did is they said they're studying brain waves, and they hooked them up to these machines to record their brain waves. And then they showed them photographs of people of different ethnic and colors. Okay. And then in the control group, they told them the actual results, but in the second group, they told them, for example, that when they saw an African American, that their brain waves showed that they had a more negative reaction to that person than somebody else. And of course, that wasn't true. And this study was in 2007. So, I mean, it is a while ago. I don't know if that would fly today, but nonetheless, so then they had these people fill out a questionnaire. And part of that questionnaire was how they felt right then. And then another part of the questionnaire was, a group of books, and they got to pick some they wanted to read, some films they wanted to see. And you can read about it. It was done by the Center for Psychological Science, 2007. And the group that were told that they basically had a guilty feeling, that they had racial feelings about color, all of that group almost felt like they wanted to improve themselves. And when they were given opportunities, without saying anything, without verbalizing it, they all chose books or material that were about, improving your non-bias, about getting rid of prejudice, about those things. So the scientists' conclusion were that the guilt was actually motivating these people to become better, or what they perceived to be better.
And they actually didn't have those racial thoughts, but because of the what they were reported, they felt they must be, and they kind of, with that self-awareness or belief self-awareness, they wanted to improve and be better. Cool.
Exactly right. So they felt guilty because of the misinformation they were given.
Right. Yeah.
I assume that somebody eventually told them the truth, but
I hope so.
Yeah. But because of that guilt, they took steps, both immediate and in the future, to try and improve themselves, right?
Yeah.
So try and change what they believed was a negative outcome in their minds. So I thought that was a really cool thing, because it's not just about the here and now. Those people were actually looking at positive ways to be better people.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting study. Yeah. You know what? You kind of had the insight when you're chatting there too, is that your ability to use guilt as a emotion, like brings to you, if that is, this is somebody else who had this act, like this is my best friend who did this, what would your response be? Your response would not be judgy in any way. It would be very compassionate and say, oh, well, you know, he or she is a lovely person. I'm sure that they're just having a bad day, and you would just accept and forgive, no question, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas if it's yourself, you beat the hell out of yourself often. But if we had that same, you know, the compassion that we have for others can only be the compassion we have for ourselves. So we have to also be very compassionate for ourselves to take that information and say, okay, that's valuable to know. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That means I want to change something. Yes. So yeah, that's a very good insight, Scott. Yeah.
Well, you taught me that point about, you know, how if your best friend did what you just did, how would you react? And then how would you react if it was you? Or how did you react when it was you? And that really has enlightened me. You told me that, I don't know, like 3 years ago, just in one of our many conversations. And it's something that I've added to my toolbox. And I find when I'm really getting down on myself, then I say, you know, hey, if Alan did this, would I be reacting that way? And it's like, no way. I'd be like, you know, hey, bud, can I help you out? You know, you know, I can see that you're tired, or, you know, that's not really you. You must, you know, something must have happened, or you're not feeling well, or, you know, right. I would be looking for the real reason. I wouldn't just say, oh, you're a bad person, you know, but exactly. Of course, when you do it yourself, you're thinking, oh boy, you know, what's wrong with me, kind of thing. And that was a really good tool that you gave me to put in my belt. And so I think that's another thing that people can take away, right? We're giving gold tonight, buddy.
Man, that's great. And that's actually, you know, thinking of that, this kind of ties in, well, it's actually saying the same thing a different way, is that if you are going to give yourself some correction, you need a talking to for some reason, that a good way to start it is, Alan, my favorite human, buddy, we got to do this better, right? Or Scott, my favorite human, you know, this is an improvement I think we need to make, right? And if you refer to yourself as your favorite human, then you're going to give yourself as much compassion as you have available to anybody else, especially somebody who you regard as a friend, right? So, yeah.
I think, just as an interesting side, I'm uncomfortable with that. I can't say I'm my favorite friend. And I think a lot of us are sort of programmed with that guilt that we're not supposed to put ourselves ahead that way, right? So, you know, I think that there's a lot of things that guilt creeps in that we were taught when we were young, or society handed to us, and we really need to deal with those things. And it really comes down to those points we talked about. You know, you apologize, you make amends to the best of your ability, you change your behavior to the best of your ability if possible, and then you accept your faults and you move on. That's it. Done. You know,
yeah.
It's finished.
Guilt served the purpose it was supposed to. We've done the cycle. It's gone. We're moving forward. Yeah. I love it, Scott Sweetman. Good job, buddy.
And that study and many more like it prove that that's working way back in our subconscious, trying to make us a better person, even when we're not thinking about it. So we don't need to keep hammering away at ourselves. You know, and that's what I found so freeing about that study, is it wasn't just having an effect like right now, oh, I'm sorry. It was having an effect in, you know, I'm going to learn more about that. I'm going to try and change my behavior. I'm going to make, you know, and so I think that's a really, really great thing that people should take hope in, is that, you know, our wonderful minds and souls, and the combination of what makes us unique in this universe, often is going about the process of healing us and making us better. And we just need to stay out of the way, right?
And let it happen. Yeah. Have some patience. Yes.
Exactly. And, you know, if we just keep hammering away and getting into that cycle of unhealthy guilt, we're getting in the way, because we don't have the time, the energy, or the disposition to let our bodies and our minds and our souls work through those things and come up with, a better us.
Scott, here's the conclusion. Here's the summary, I think, from what you're telling me. There is guilt that serves a very valuable purpose, and then there's guilt that can have a negative lingering effect. And the positive purpose, what we're encouraging our listeners to do, is use guilt as a short-term correction, not as to beat yourself up, just as a correction. Gee, you know what? I have a thought about that maybe I could handle that better in the future, right? And you change what goes forward. You forgive yourself just as you would your best friend, that you would forgive them if they were inattentive or whatever. They're having a bad day. So we all have bad days. We all make mistakes. Guilt is a tool to help us learn, change our immediate behavior, apologize if necessary, and move forward in a more positive way.
Because we all sometimes growl when somebody tries to take our cookie out.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
Well said, my friend. I think that sums it up. And I think people, just know that guilt does serve a positive end. And the thing to do is those few things you can do, and then trust that it's going to take care of itself. Your mind's going to keep working away at it, and get out of the way and let your mind and soul heal itself.
Beautifully said, Mr. Sweetman. Keep yourself well, my friend.
You bet. You too. Take care.
All right.
See you next Thursday.